The Gaza Strip, or simply Gaza, is a plain-exclave region of the State of Palestine on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea that borders Egypt on the southwest for 11 kilometers and Israel on the east and north along a 51 kilometers border. Gaza is part of the Palestinian territories, which also includes the West Bank and are claimed by the State of Palestine. The territory is 41 kilometers long, and from 6 to 12 kilometers wide, with a total area of 365 square kilometers. With around 1.8 million Palestinians on some 360 square kilometers, Gaza is among the regions with the highest population density in the world. Moreover, a substantial part of the territory is depopulated because of the imposition of a large buffer zone maintained by Israel within the Gaza border. If Gaza City itself is compared, the density is half of the population density of New York City, and similar to the density of numerous U.S. cities like Boston, or that of Singapore or Hong Kong, with the difference that Hong Kong's wealth permits it to maintain a far higher standard of living. Gaza has an annual population growth rate of 2.91%, the 13th highest in the world, and is often referred to as overcrowded. Due to the Israeli-Egyptian blockade, the population is not free to leave or enter the Gaza Strip, nor allowed to freely import or export goods. Sunni Muslims make up the predominant part of the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip. Despite the 2005 Israeli disengagement from Gaza, the United Nations, international human rights organizations, and the majority of governments and legal commentators consider the territory to be still occupied by Israel, supported by additional restrictions placed on Gaza by Egypt. Israel maintains direct external control over Gaza and indirect control over life within Gaza. It controls Gaza's air and maritime space, and 6 of Gaza's 7 land crossings. It reserves the right to enter Gaza at will with its military and maintains a no-go buffer zone within the Gaza territory. Gaza is dependent on Israel for its water, electricity, telecommunications, and other utilities. After a violent intra-Palestinian battle in 2007 followed by Hamas' takeover of Gaza and the expulsion of Fatah-allied officials and security members from Gaza, Hamas established a Hamas government in place of the Palestinian Authority government appointed by President Abbas. Governance. Hamas government. The Hamas government of 2012 was the second Palestinian Hamas-dominated government ruling over the Gaza Strip since the split of the Palestinian National Authority in 2007. It was announced on early September 2012. The reshuffle of the previous government was approved by Gaza-based Hamas MPs from the Palestinian Legislative Council or Parliament. Other political and militant groups in Gaza, or the Islamic Jihad movement in Palestine, also known as the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, is a Palestinian militant organization operating in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The group has been labeled as a terrorist group by the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Japan, Canada, Australia and Israel. Iran is a major financial supporter of the PIJ. Islamic Jihad is the second largest militant Islamic group in Gaza, with 8,000 fighters present in the Gaza Strip. In June 2013, the Islamic Jihad broke ties with Hamas leaders after Hamas police fatally shot the commander of Islamic Jihad's military wing. Deal with Fatah. On September 25, 2014, Hamas agreed to let the Palestinian Authority resume control over the Gaza Strip and its border crossings with Egypt and Israel. Status: military occupation. The international community regards all of the Palestinian territories including Gaza as occupied. Human Rights Watch has advised the UN Human Rights Council that it views Israel as a de facto occupying power in the Gaza Strip, even though Israel has no military or other presence, because the Oslo Accord authorizes Israel to control the airspace and the territorial sea. In his statement on the 2008-2009 Israel-Gaza conflict, Richard Falk, United Nations Special Rapporteur wrote that international humanitarian law applied to Israel, in regard to the obligations of an occupying power and in the requirements of the laws of war. Amnesty International, the World Health Organization, Oxfam, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the United Nations General Assembly, the UN Fact-Finding Mission to Gaza, international human rights organizations, US government websites, the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and a significant number of legal commentators from the border, making 17% of Gaza's total territory a risk zone. Israel says the buffer zone is needed to protect Israeli communities just over the border from sniper fire and rocket attacks. In the 18 months until November 2010, one Thai farm worker in Israel was killed by a rocket fired from Gaza, and in 2010, according to IDF figures, 180 rockets and mortars had been fired into Israel by militants. In 6 months, however, 11 Palestinian civilians, including 4 children, had been killed by Israeli fire and at least 70 Palestinian civilians were injured in the same period, including at least 49 who were working collecting rubble and scrap metal. A buffer zone was also created on the Egyptian side of the Gaza-Egypt border. In 2014, scores of homes in Rafah were destroyed for the buffer zone. According to Amnesty International, more than 800 homes had been destroyed and more than 1,000 families evicted. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas agreed with the destruction of smuggling tunnels by flooding them, and then punishing the owners of the houses that contained entrances to the tunnels, including demolishing their houses, arguing that the tunnels had produced 1,800 millionaires, and were used for smuggling weapons, drugs, cash, and equipment for forging documents. Gaza blockade. Israel and Egypt maintain a blockade of the Gaza Strip, although Israel allows in limited quantities of medical humanitarian aid. The Red Cross claimed that the blockade harms the economy and causes a shortage of basic medicines and equipment such as painkillers and X-ray film. Israel claims the blockade is necessary to prevent the smuggling of weapons into Gaza. For example, in 2014, a Panamanian-flagged ship claiming to be carrying construction materials was boarded by the IDF and was found to contain Syrian-produced rockets. Israel maintains that the blockade is legal and necessary to limit Palestinian rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip on its cities and to prevent Hamas from obtaining other weapons. Director of the Shin Bet Yuval Diskin did not oppose easing trade restrictions, but said that smuggling tunnels in Sinai and an open seaport in the Gaza Strip endangered Israel's security. According to Diskin, Hamas and Islamic Jihad had smuggled in over 5,000 rockets with ranges up to 40 kilometers. Some of the rockets could reach as far as the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Israeli spokesman Mark Regev described Israel's actions as sanctions, not a blockade. But a Gazan legal consultant for UNRWA called the blockade an action outside of international law. In July 2010, British Prime Minister David Cameron said, "Humanitarian goods and people must flow in both directions. Gaza cannot and must not be allowed to remain a prison camp." In response, the spokesman for the Israeli embassy in London said, "The people of Gaza are the prisoners of the terrorist organization Hamas. The situation in Gaza is the direct result of Hamas rule and priorities." The Arab League accused Israel of waging a financial war. The IDF strictly controlled travel within the area of the crossing points between Israel and the Gaza Strip and sealed its border with Gaza. U.S. government travel guides warned tourists that the region was dangerous. Facing mounting international pressure, Egypt and Israel lessened the restrictions starting in June 2010, when the Rafah border crossing from Egypt to Gaza was partially opened by Egypt. Egypt's foreign ministry said that the crossing would remain open mainly for people, but not for supplies. Israel announced that it would allow the passage of civilian goods but not weapons and items that could be used for dual purposes. In January and February 2011, The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs assessed measures taken to ease the blockade and concluded that they were helpful but not sufficient to improve the lives of the local inhabitants. UNOCHA called on Israel to reduce restrictions on exports and the import of construction materials, and to lift the general ban on movement between Gaza and the West Bank via Israel. After Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak resigned on 28 May 2011, Egypt permanently opened its border with the Gaza Strip to students, medical patients, and foreign passport holders. Following the 2013 Egyptian coup d'état, Egypt's military has destroyed most of the 1,200 tunnels which are used for smuggling food, weapons, and other goods to Gaza. After the August 2013 Rabaa massacre in Egypt, the border crossing was closed indefinitely. Israel has alternately restricted or allowed goods and people to cross the terrestrial border and handles vicariously the movement of goods into and out of Gaza by air and sea. Israel largely provides for Gaza's water supply, electricity, and communications infrastructure. Movement of people. Because of the Israeli-Egyptian blockade, the population is not free to leave or enter the Gaza Strip. Only in exceptional cases are people allowed to pass through the Erez crossing or the Rafah border crossing. Under the long-term blockade, the Gaza Strip is often described by observers, ranging from Roger Cohen and Lawrence Weskler to NGOs, such as B'Tselem, and politicians and diplomats, such as David Cameron, Noam Chomsky, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, David Shoebridge and Sir John Holmes, as a prison camp or open-air prison for its collective denizens. In 2014, French President François Hollande called for the demilitarization of Gaza and a lifting of the blockade, saying, "Gaza must neither be an open prison nor a military base." An anonymous Israeli analyst has called it Israel's Alcatraz, while Lauren Booth, Philip Slater, Giorgio Agamben compare it to a concentration camp for Robert S. Wistrich and Philip Mendes. Such analogies are designed to offend Jews, while Philip Sieb dismisses the comparison as absurd, and claims that it arises from sources like Al Jazeera and statements by Arab leaders.